Okay, today I'm going to talk about balance. And balance is the principle of design concerned with equalizing visual elements. So, a work of art must contain balance in order to be a good work of art. And visual imbalance, like the Leaning Tower of Pisa here, creates the feeling of uneasiness within us. And I also want you to know what formal balance is, where you have equal or similar elements that are placed on both sides of a central axis. And with this, you just kind of like think of a mirror image on both sides. Like you see the two birds there, one is copied and then flipped around to the other side, and it's exactly the same, only just a different orientation. Formal balance is the easiest type of balance to create and recognize, and because it's this easy to create, whatever you do to the left, got to do the same thing to the right. Whatever you do to the right, you do the same thing to the left, and that is very easy to imagine doing or to create, and that is why I think that the first semester of art history is just so filled with this formal balance because it's easy. And like I've been saying, it looks like a mirror image. So symmetry, work of art, it looks like a mirror image on both sides of the central axis. And the symmetry expresses dignity, endurance, and stability. And symmetry can be predictable, boring, and dull. And that's certainly my interpretation of it or my bias on the symmetry. It's very predictable when you look at it. So when you have formal balance, it gives a feeling of dignity and strength. It's calm, it's quiet, it's strong, and it's used to create a dignified group of portraits, like this one right here. There's the same number of people on the left as there is on the right, and they're kind of equally kind of spaced out. It's like looks like there's couples that are balanced and symmetrical architecture is dignified and calm. We see it a lot in architecture. And symmetry is very appealing, possibly because the bilateral symmetry of the human body and the symmetry of the face. When you have the same that's on both sides, it creates symmetry. So when we're looking at symmetry in ancient art and art before the Renaissance, we see it a lot. We can see it in these cycladic figures. We can see it in this Minoan figure, and in any work of art where you can divide, like draw an imaginary line down the middle and have it exactly the same on both sides. That is symmetry. Now this one is quite asymmetrical in the clothes. Like the robe goes around on one side but not the other. But in almost all of the artworks that we come across in the first semester, they are all symmetrical, both Eastern and Western. And I think that the reason why we see this in cultures that are not even closely in contact with each other, because the symmetry is such an easy balance to create. We see it all over in the first semester. Now here is some. This one is asymmetrical, where the horse is mostly on the right side, and the man is mostly on the left side. So this is a little bit different, and I think that this image should be later on in this slideshow. This one is also it's a little bit asymmetrical, where Achilles is wearing the helmet, but Ajax is not. But and all over when I was going through all the artwork of the first semester, there's so much of it that is asymmetrical. All right, and then approximate symmetry is the same comfortable feeling as symmetrical, but with small differences. And so I just mentioned that the rider on the horse, that would be a good example of approximate symmetry, where, if you were to draw the line down the middle, yes, there's one person on the left and one person on the right, but they are different sized and they are slightly different. And the red house on the right, or the red, is not balanced exactly on the left, but so that we call that an approximate balance. And here we have that approximate balance that is mostly equal on both sides with some slight differences. And then there's radial balance. And this when elements in a work of art radiate and rotate around a central point, or radiate from or rotate around. So this, you see it a lot in machines, but in nature. So these are examples of radial symmetry. And in our first semester of art history, we see it in the catacombs under Rome, and we see it in domes. And domes are, and the rose windows are a big source of this radial symmetry that we find a lot in the early part of art history. We can see it in the wagon wheel of early Indian art, and the feathered uh, serpent has a radial design around the head. And then an informal balance is organizing the elements of a work of art so that unlike objects can have equal visual weight. It gives the same viewers this gives the viewer the same comfortable feeling as formal balance, but a much more subtle way. Also called asymmetrical balance. It creates a much more casual effect. For example, in this painting, the large woman on the left is balanced by the small guy plus the cat. So these two are smaller shapes than the woman, but because they are a little bit more complicated and have different, has a higher contrast, then that attracts our eye just as much as the large woman attracts our eye, and it creates a balance. But I see that very rarely in the first semester. Second semester, we'll see it a lot more, but in this first semester, there's very few artworks that have this type of balance. So here are some factors that influence the visual weight. The larger shapes look heavier, so that woman should have grabbed our attention first because she was larger. Complicated shapes look more interesting and seem heavier. So like the more complicated shape of the man and the cat grabbed our attention and balanced out the larger shape of the woman. The intensity of colors appears heavier than dull colors. So that man had more intense colors than the woman, so it grabbed our attention. And then sharp contrast in value has more visual weight than a weak contrast in value. And he has more contrast in value because his shirt is much lighter than the vest, whereas her shirt or her dress is much more closer to this darker color right here. So there's less contrast here, more contrast here. So the big shape is balanced by the smaller shapes because it's more complicated, it has its brighter colors, and it has a stronger contrast. And then the same thing with textures. Rough textures have more weight than smooth textures. And in architecture, this is an example of this asymmetrical design that is not even on both sides. And in paintings that we'll see second semester, the asymmetrical composition will look like this. especially with Edward Hopper. And it doesn't even have to be a vertical axis. It could also be a horizontal axis. So all the weight is down at the bottom because it's small shapes that are complicated, but they're brightly colored. But that's balanced by the larger shapes that have the simple colors. So here is a sort of asymmetrical balance where there's much more weight on the right side than on the left side. I think we have some asymmetrical, and these lower two panels, these are asymmetrical. And then, but especially in the Gothic churches, they are very asymmetrical with their towers. And then Asian art is very asymmetrical. All the weight is on the left side. And some of the images in uh, the first semester are asymmetrical. Is asymmetrical. Most of the weight is on. It seems like it's on the right side, and then the Leaning Tower Pisa is asymmetrical. All right, so that finishes us for balance.